Hi, my name is Michael St. Lawrence. I'd first like to welcome you to this segment of the SalesGym webinar series. We've packed a lot of ideas and actionable information into this 20-minute webinar, so we're going to get right down to it. We're going to cover three specific things. The first is some insights from a groundbreaking research study about sales teams, salespeople, and sales leaders that you're going to find interesting. Secondly, we're going to look at the most common blind spots that sales organizations have that lower their overall results. And finally, we're going to share with you what sales leaders across the country are telling us is a radically new approach to quickly improving the performance of their sales teams. I would like to encourage you all to ask as many questions as possible, as we've got Dean Ray behind the scenes. He's one of our SalesGym coaches, and he'll be taking in all those questions and serving them up as they come in. So thanks in advance to Dean for his help with this webinar. To get us started, I'd like to share some interesting ideas that came out of a conversation with a sales executive that had a 1,200-person sales team for a financial services company. They were spread out all over the country. And in that conversation, he shared with me that they had hired a research firm to come in and study their sales team to find out what it is they need to do to generate better results. He told me the research study cost them well over 7 figures, and they interviewed the bulk of their sales team and observed them on sales calls, and they came up with some very specific observations about the team. And I asked him, what was the most important thing you learned? The most important bottom line results of what they shared after observing the sales team on sales calls with their prospects and clients, how they use technology, how their sales managers interacted with them, and just in general, all aspects of the sales team, was that the most important thing they had to get better at was listening to their clients and prospects, asking better questions, finding out what their needs are, and really tailoring their solution to what would resonate most with the decision makers they were meeting with. And when I asked him what he thought of the findings, he told me that, Mike, deep down, I knew this was the problem because I've observed our people in interactions with our clients for years, and I've always felt they're just not listening enough or asking the right questions to really identify how we can help them more. And finally, he shared with me a frustration, which is that just knowing what the problem is, especially when it comes down to really fundamental skills like listening and asking good questions, doesn't necessarily help you to solve them. So this conversation really sparked my curiosity. And primarily it was to find out, is this a common problem across all industries? So SalesGym is a training, consulting, and research firm, and we decided to launch our own really comprehensive research study that involved interviews with over 300 sales leaders. We tested dozens of sales teams and thousands of salespeople. In each of the interviews with the sales leaders, we started with the same question, which is, what are the mistakes that salespeople make when interacting with decision makers that lower their odds of success? And in nearly all cases, the answers boil down to 4 critical factors. The first one was talking too much, not listening enough, just not paying attention to what the decision maker was saying. The second one, very related to that, is not asking the right questions at the right time in the sales interaction. The third one was not being able to convey or communicate a value proposition or differentiating factors or competitive advantages that really had impact and resonated with the decision makers and influencers they were meeting with. And the final one was that too many times on too many calls, salespeople just didn't close, ask for the order, or at least identify the next steps. So when we asked these executives how often this happened with what percentage of their sales force, the answers ranged from 60 to 80% of the time, meaning that on 60 to 80% of all the sales interactions their salespeople have, and keep in mind, most of these sales leaders managed large sales teams, that in 60 to 80% of the time, they were making these mistakes that were lowering their odds of success. So the next question we asked them is, what is the systemic weakness or weakest link in your sales organization that is allowing these mistakes to happen, week after week, month after month with the same salespeople, often with experienced people that have been in the organization for years? And in nearly all cases, it was the same answer. In their opinion, it was that the sales team was not getting the kind of feedback and coaching they needed in order to break those bad habits. So after we finished these interviews, we started testing their sales teams, meaning watching them on sales calls, putting them through role play scenarios, putting them through practice drills, and we came up with some really basic mistakes that they were making that could be addressed with effective coaching. The first one, which is by far the most common and has the most limiting impact on sales interactions, is using too many closed ended questions. The second one has to do with the mental model or paradigm that so many sellers approach sales interactions with. And we call that at SalesGym pitch and test. And what that means is they tend to approach a conversation in terms of bringing an idea or a product or a solution and testing it out to see if there's interest in it. So they lead with product, or they lead with an idea, or they lead with a solution, and that doesn't work very well. The third mistake is listening to respond instead of listening to understand. That's that Stephen Covey principle that so many people have difficulty with. The next one is not being able to communicate the ideal agenda that creates that ask, listen, understand first dynamic. The next one was an inability to really identify their core differentiating factors one at a time and communicate them in a way that really resonates and has impact and is tailored to what they learned when they asked good questions. And finally, they don't know how to use a good summary in order to identify the areas that they agree with and really transition or pivot into closing questions or identifying those next steps. So the good news is every one of these areas lends itself to practice and coaching and rehearsal in such a way where salespeople can really get better at it. But unfortunately, most sales managers have no idea how to do that kind of practice or that kind of coaching. And as a result of that, they give their sales teams a lot of advice and best practices, and what I would do if I was in your situation. But unfortunately, that kind of coaching with about 70 to 80% of all salespeople simply doesn't work. They need a much more proactive and assertive coaching approach. All right, it looks like we've got our first question. Dean, what have you got?
Mike, we got a question from the audience. Dan in Atlanta asked us, you said you've identified the problem that I think almost every sales leader can actually relate to and they can see. The question is, why is this the case? Why is this happening?
Dan, that's a great question. And the truth is that nearly all sales training programs, and actually what sales managers focus on in coaching, is actually zeroing in on these issues. Every training program that's been developed over the last 30 years focuses on asking better questions and listening and communicating more value and tailoring your message and getting your competitive advantages really streamlined so they're clear and effective and organized. All training programs focus on those things. If the training doesn't have enough practice and drills-based repetition, salespeople don't develop that muscle memory, that ability to perform well under pressure. So the focus is on the right topics, but it's the training methodology that is off. And that's what we're going to zero in on in this next segment of the webinar. Every one of the sales leaders that we interviewed worked for a large company with a large sales team. And as such, they had training resources in place. Their sales team went through sales training on a regular basis, whether it was at their yearly kickoff meetings or regional conferences or quarterly get-togethers or special training programs designed not just for new hires, but ongoing training for their more seasoned team members. So all of this stuff was in place. And in most cases, they had coaching programs and leadership programs for their sales managers and teaching those frontline managers how to interact with and debrief sales calls and train their team. So all of these things were in place, but they just weren't having much impact. So what we decided to do was to look outside of business and certainly outside of sales organizations and identify who are the best coaches in the world. And we looked to three specific different areas. The first is obviously elite sports coaches. It's absolutely amazing what they're doing with their athletes. The second one is performing arts. For instance, a director of a ballet or of a symphony or of a Broadway show. They're very good at coaching their performers to a very high level of excellence. And then the third area was that first responder or special ops military trainers. Those folks are fantastic at getting their people to perform under pressure, in many cases under life and death situations at a very high level. And so we looked at what is it exactly that they're doing different from business people or from sales coaches that really makes all the impact. And it was so obvious when we started interviewing them and watching how they interacted and coached their people. What they do is constant training in bursts of practice, short drills that develop speed and strength and agility and quickness and endurance. And they do it constantly throughout the week so that their team members just keep getting better and better, and they start breaking bad habits, and they start developing confidence at doing new things with new skills. And that's really what it's about, is you need a lot of repetition to develop new skills and develop the confidence to use those skills under pressure. So with sports coaches and performing arts directors and special ops trainers, they spend a good percentage, like well over 50% of their time in training and in practice. This is in contrast with what we see with sales coaches. Now, with sales coaches, when you observe what they really do when they think they're coaching, it really boils down to four specific areas. The first one is what we call strategic coaching. That's going over numbers, metrics, pipelines, projections. It's really the numbers, metrics, and goals-based part of managing, which is very important. The second one is what we would call observational coaching. That's where you're watching your people sell, listening to them on calls, maybe listening to recorded calls, or going on calls with them and just observing them in action. Very important as well. The third one is what we call deal mechanic coaching, which is often done in more complex selling where the seller just needs help from their manager. They don't understand how to do a proposal, or they may need help understanding the internal dynamics of how to get the deal done. So we call that deal mechanic coaching. And then the fourth area, which is related to what sports coaches do, is that practice-based coaching. And it's important to understand that the most dramatic difference between how sports coaches and sales managers coach and spend their coaching time is that sports coaches spend the bulk of it in that training and drills-based repetition to build skills and muscle memory to perform well under pressure. Whereas sales managers spend more of their time in that analytic mode, which is communicating goals, objectives, the strategy, the incentives, the pipeline projections, and getting people to commit to and keep and hit their goals. And these are two very different approaches to performance improvement. And what we're going to suggest is that sales managers need to blend in more of that sports-based coaching, that drills-based practice, to complement what they're doing in that strategy-based coaching so that they're going to get much better results. So when we started sharing this research with our clients, what they asked us to do was to create a sports-based coaching methodology that they could teach their sales managers and put their sales teams through to see if it had the same kind of impact on salespeople that sports-based coaching has on athletes. And the good news is that it really does. It took us several years and thousands of interactions to really understand, how do you adapt that sports-based coaching to a sales team? How can you develop and deliver those short drills that really impact the way that people communicate so that they start asking better questions and listening, so they communicate their differentiating factors in a more concise way that has more impact and is more tailored to what they've learned? These things can be put into drills that sales teams can practice, and it can have real impact. And this is often what's missing in sales organizations. They have the right ideas, they have the right sales process, they have the right methodology, they have the right concepts in their training program, but what's missing is that drills-based repetition and practice. Dean just gave me a signal that he's got another question. Dean, what's the question?
So, Mike, I'm glancing through the LinkedIn comments here, and one of the comments we got is from Allison in Houston, and she said sports teams and performing arts groups are literally paid to train and practice. That's a good point. And if salespeople did that much training, they'd have no time to sell. So she wants to know, what's the right balance whenever it comes to doing the training versus going actually out there and selling.
Thanks for bringing that question up, Allison. And it's important to understand that obviously sports teams and performing arts groups, they're paid to practice. They can put in 20, 30 hours a week of preparation, in some cases even more than that, for an upcoming performance. And that's just not practical for sales teams to be able to do that. But it is practical for sales teams to spend more time practicing than they currently are. For example, let's look at sales managers. If they invested 5% of their time each week, which is about 2 to maybe 3 hours at most, in practicing with their sales teams, that's a realistic amount of time. 5% of their time in an activity that has the most dramatic impact on the 4 mistakes that limit results. So when you look at the sales team, what if they were to put just 1 hour a week into that drills-based, intense practice that's going to give them better skills and more confidence to perform under pressure and break that, too much talking habit and not asking the right questions and not being able to communicate key value. Practicing these elements will have dramatic impact on their overall results. So, in summary, sales managers should put about 5% of their time into practice based coaching, and sales team members should practice about 1 hour a week. Over the last several months, a number of sales leaders that became curious when they learned about our radically different drills based practice approach asked us if they could peek in on a session just to get a sense for how it works and the impact it has on salespeople. And the reactions we get from them are really interesting, and they're pretty consistent. The first thing they notice is it's just set up completely differently than traditional sales training. What we found is that the virtual environment is ideal for this drills based coaching. And in fact, it's better than live training. The reason for this is that we found the perfect number of people to go through a drill is one coach and 4 to 5 sellers. So you have 5 to 6 people participating in this exercise, and that keeps the drill going nice and fast, and it keeps pressure on each participant. So in a 1 hour session, each person is going through the same practice drill 5, 6, 7, in some cases as many as 10 times. And it creates enough repetition that they start to learn how to communicate in a more effective way. The second thing that they notice is just how much time and effort we spend on what we call sales messaging. And sales messaging is essentially how salespeople answer the most basic fundamental questions a decision maker or influencer might have, like, what makes you different from your competitor? What are your competitive advantages? How can you help me in ways that my current provider isn't helping me? Because what we found is when we do drills around these areas and salespeople become confident and clear and concise in answering those questions, that's really the DNA of selling. These are the things that they communicate throughout the sales process. And more importantly, we train salespeople how to end every response to every question with an effective open-ended question. And it's the connecting of an open-ended question to a differentiating factor that starts to transform the way people communicate under pressure in a sales situation. So, in addition to these drills around sales messaging, which are really designed to help people to get much more effective with their differentiating factors and open-ended questions, we also have designed drills around the entire sales communication process. Starting a meeting with an ideal agenda, how to introduce yourself in a way that you position yourself as a thought leader, how to ask insight-based or challenger-oriented questions, drills on how to transition from one questioning area to the next without overreacting to what we learned. So we keep those decision makers talking and responding to our questions, so we really identify those needs. And then how to summarize and transition into a solution or a presentation that is organized and easy to follow and interactive and naturally leads into the closing process. Each of these skills has been engineered into these short burst, high energy, quick practice drills that break bad habits and teach salespeople to perform new skills under pressure in live selling situations. Dean just gave me a signal that he's got another question. Dean, what's the question?
So, Mike, Sharon in Scottsdale actually asked something I think we can relate to, and that is, what about salespeople that are more experienced in setting their ways, right? So, if you're resistant to change, like what kind of response can you expect from this type of practice?
Sharon, that's a really great question, because in any organization, realistically, a certain percentage of the sales team are going to be resistant to change. And oftentimes, this is the more experienced people. And what we found, and we spent a lot of time really practicing and kind of testing ways to break through that resistance. And what we found more than anything else is that our sales coaches need to develop fantastic examples of what great sounds like when we're doing a practice drill. So if, for instance, we're learning how to answer the question, what makes you different from your competitor? We're going to have that sales team, each sales team member that's going through the drill, pick a specific decision maker that they know and answer the question as if speaking directly to that person. And part of the preparation for us delivering these programs is we get to know our clients' business. We interview their top performers. We listen to how they respond to these questions. And then our sales coaches go through intense practice and preparation themselves so they can do demonstrations of these various drills. And it's the demonstration of what great sounds like that is really the most effective tool to punch through that resistance. So, in summary, it's keeping those cohorts relatively small and having our coaches prepared to have great examples of how to communicate in the customer's business that really breaks through that resistance. One of the most important questions we ask our clients when we start a project is, who is coaching the coaches? I mean, we all know that sales leaders hold sales managers accountable and focus on their goals and their pipelines and their commitments and give them problems to follow up on and ask them where they need help and that kind of thing. But who is really coaching the coaches on how to coach salespeople? Who's teaching the frontline sales managers how to interact with their salespeople in a way that breaks these bad habits, how to run practice drills? And what we find with nearly every company we worked with is there really is nobody doing that. There may be a trainer that presents a coaching program, or maybe you use an outside group to, present a sales coaching seminar, but who's really working with them to show them how to interact with salespeople, how to run drills, how to practice with them, how to give them the kind of feedback that is going to change the way they sell, how to make salespeople aware of the mistakes they're making, what to do when salespeople are talking too much and not asking the right questions. Who is coaching the coaches? And if you don't have somebody that is coaching the coaches, I guarantee you that your salespeople are making these mistakes that are limiting their results on their sales calls. It's the same thing as a sports coach that would send an athlete into competition that they know is not fast enough, is not quick enough, is not strong enough, because they haven't been coached and trained to develop the strength and quickness and speed and endurance to be able to perform at a high level. Organizations need to coach the coaches so that they learn how to run the kind of practice drills and those short burst, intense practice sessions that impact the way people sell and ultimately build a strong, top performing sales team. If your sales managers and salespeople develop the discipline of practicing together every week, you're going to find that the results are going to improve much faster because they'll stop making these obvious results limiting mistakes. You'll be able to observe them listening better on sales calls and asking better questions and communicating a higher potential value proposition and really tailoring their message. That's what practice does. And it's going to impact that 70% of salespeople that are making these very basic mistakes. So practice coaching really is the missing ingredient. And if you put more emphasis on that, you're going to transform your sales culture and transform the way your salespeople and sales managers interact. So before I share with you some thoughts by Michael Jordan and Phil Jackson about practice, I would like to offer to you that SalesGym can demonstrate one of these practice-based sessions for your company. All you need to do is really identify 4 to 5 salespeople, middle performers, people that are eager to grow, eager to learn, and challenge us to perform a 60-minute practice session with them. And this is a session that will be drills-based, it'll be fast-paced, and it'll really allow you as a sales leader and anybody else in your organization to observe and see the immediate impact of this type of training. And if you're like virtually every sales leader that we've worked with, you will find it to be radically different from what you expect, and you will be shocked at how quickly your people can improve. So let's quickly summarize this webinar into what you need to do as a sales leader to generate better results with your sales organization. First, recognize and accept that a high percentage of your sales team is making very basic mistakes on sales interactions that is dramatically reducing their odds of success. Secondly, recognize the best way to break bad habits is with drills-based, repetitive practice coaching. Third, realize that if you're not coaching the coaches and there isn't somebody in the organization that really understands how to train coaches to train their sales teams, to train coaches on how to interact with their salespeople to build those stronger skills, then it's not happening. And finally, recognize that it's up to you, the sales leader, to will it, to intend it to happen, to build the kind of organization that practices at the grassroots level and sales coaches that know how to interact with their people to build the skills that increase their odds of success so that your organization wins more deals. All right, let's finish this webinar with a couple of thoughts from some sports superstars that were absolute masters of practice, and let's hear what they have to say. The first one comes from Michael Jordan. Here's what he said. It's hard to find people who look at practice the way that I do, so that when the game comes, it's easier than the practice. You have to be as competitive in preparation as you would be in a championship game. My attitude is that with practice and an attitude to improve, I can turn any weakness into a strength. And here's what Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan's coach, had to say about coaching and practice. I think the most rewarding part of the job, and I think most coaches would say, is practice. If you have a very good practice in which you have 12 guys participate and they can really get something out of it and lose themselves in practice, the more that happens in practice, the more we win. The bottom line is when sales managers learn how to practice and run drills the way elite sports coaches do, and when the sales team learns how to practice the way elite athletes do, you create a sales team that is going to win at a faster pace. If you would like more information on how to schedule one of these high-intensity, drills-based practice sessions in your organization with your salespeople that you can observe and just see the impact it has on them, contact Kumi at SalesGym.com, and she can get you the information you need to schedule one at no cost to you. So, from all of us here at SalesGym, thank you for watching this webinar.